Good morning. I'm glad to see you all and appreciate you being here today to listen to a description of and some stories about a recent pilgrimage that a group from St. Peter's made to the beautiful and fascinating country of Turkey. I'm going to take just a few minutes at the beginning just to kind of talk about some things in a more general way. Father Nathan is going to help focus in on the spiritual significance of that very holy place. And then others who were part of the pilgrimage are going to share with you some things about it that were special to them, along with some slides. I want to begin just by saying a little bit about pilgrimage. I'm often asked about, what is a pilgrimage? What's the difference in a pilgrimage and a trip? Well, certainly going on pilgrimage involves travel, and it is a trip. But a pilgrimage, as you may have noticed in the prayer that I just prayed, involves doing a little bit more than that. In fact, it involves doing a lot more than that. I want to just share with you a definition of pilgrimage that actually comes from our tradition, from the Episcopal Church. A pilgrimage is a journey or trip that is taken with devotional attention or intention. That pilgrimages are typically made to shrines, holy places, or locations of religious significance. They may be made as prayers of thanksgiving, penitence, intercession, or petition. Pilgrimages have been practiced in many religious traditions, of course in Christianity, but also in Hinduism, Islam, and Judaism. There are records of Christian pilgrimages dating from the 2nd and 3rd centuries to places like Jerusalem and Rome, shrines of the Blessed Virgin Mary, Lourdes in France, and Walsingham in England have also been popular places of pilgrimage. So to go on a pilgrimage is obviously, as I said, does involve travel, but it is also something that is a very intentional way of trying to not only learn more about a place that may have been designated as or is seen to be a holy place, but also about deepening your relationship with God. So this pilgrimage, along with other pilgrimages that I have been part of and have led, have been that. They have been deeply spiritual, not only for me, but I believe, and from what I've heard through feedback from those who've made them, have been that for them as well. I can tell you that it is a humbling experience in many ways to know that you are literally walking in places and in the footsteps of in some cases millions and millions of people who have gone in the same places before. And it is also a unique way to be able to pray, to be able to worship, and to be able to have the Bible, the words that we read in the Bible, come to life. And to be able to connect what we hear, what we read, what we teach and preach about and study in the Bible to particular places. And of course, in many of these places, there have been pilgrims, people who've been making pilgrimages to them, as I mentioned a moment ago, again in the prayer, for centuries. And there are remnants of those people there. Sometimes it will be in the places in stone or marble where literally over the centuries the footsteps have carved out those incredibly hard surfaces. And it's also very humbling to be able to be in places where you are with others from various countries who are Christian, and in some cases not Christian, who are also walking in the footsteps of many who have gone before. In many of the ancient traditions, making a pilgrimage was something that not only was what people wanted to do, but it was required of them. So I have found that this type of travel, this type of spiritual travel, this type of making these types of pilgrimages is a way not only of deepening our relationship with the text, with the Bible, with God, but also with each other. So I want to share with you actually the letter that went out in the brochure that was prepared for our trip to Turkey. I'm excited to have this opportunity to invite you and others who may want to participate on a pilgrimage to Turkey. The spiritual practice of pilgrimage has been important to Christians for centuries as people have traveled to many sacred places around the world. This pilgrimage is to a place that is known as the Second Holy Land. It will begin and end in Istanbul, which has become one of the most visited cities in the world. From there, we will visit and explore places across Turkey that help shape the Christian faith and spend time reflecting on the historical and spiritual significance of those places. I hope you will join me on this pilgrimage that will provide an opportunity to learn, to have fellowship and fun, to worship and pray together, and that will help deepen our relationship with God. I think that I can't often speak on behalf of other people, but I think I can speak on behalf of the 15 of us who traveled to Turkey that we lived into all of that. And some of you will see some of that reflected, not only in the pictures of the sacred and holy places, but also in the fellowship and fun that we had along the way. Again, spiritual pilgrimages are important to me and are part of my ministry. What I learned when I was preparing for this pilgrimage, which I had hoped would be to Israel, to the Holy Land, but for obvious reasons it was something that we were not able to do. What I learned is more about the immense significance of Turkey as being what's referred to as being the second Holy Land. And while we were there, we were told more than once that because of the fact that travel to Israel has been so limited over the last couple of years, that there's been a significant increase in the number of pilgrims who are going to Turkey as a way of moving into that relationship with God through the experiences of being in a place like this. So you can see that this was a pilgrimage to Turkey, referred to also as being the cradle of the church. As I mentioned, there were 15 of us who took this pilgrimage, and there we go. And even though it was not necessarily promoted or billed in this way, a significant part of what we did was visit 6 of what are known as the 7 churches of Revelation. And in the 2nd and 3rd chapter of the book of Revelation, the last book in the Bible, there are references to each of these churches and communication that was sent to them as John, who was on the island of Patmos, was having this vision from God and about the church. So often what you will see and what you hear about are pilgrimages that are framed around visiting the 7 churches of Revelation. So, as I mentioned, you'll find those in the 2nd and 3rd book of Revelation. Ephesus, the church that had abandoned its first love for Christ, comes early on in chapter 2. Smyrna, the church that would face severe persecution in Revelation 2. Pergamum, the church that needed to repent of sin in Revelation 2. We did not visit, remind me how to pronounce that one. Thyatira. This is one that we did not go to. The church whose false prophetess was leading people astray. Sardis, the sleeping church that needed to wake up in Revelation 3. Philadelphia, the church that had patiently persevered in Revelation 3. And Laodicea, the church with lukewarm faith, also in Revelation 3. So all of these 7 churches are mentioned in Revelation. Let's see here, Jacqueline. I'm not doing real well, am I? All right. So this is the 15. This is our group in Istanbul, where we began this pilgrimage. Some of you may have been to Istanbul, and if you have, then you know that it is it is now the largest city in Europe. It has a population of 16 million people. So if you put that in perspective of the 8 million that live in New York City is like a little town compared to Istanbul. Istanbul holds the unique distinction of being the only city in the world that is on 2 continents. And this is a bridge that goes across the Bosphorus Strait from Europe into Asia, and so you literally just cross over, and it's one of several bridges that take people across from Europe into Asia and back and forth, but you're still always in the city of Istanbul. Istanbul is a very international city. It was founded in the year 330 as Constantinople. It was the first great Christian city and one of the most significant cities in history. It is served as the capital of 4 empires. the Roman Empire, the Byzantine, the Latin, the Ottoman, and it is a place that is instrumental in the advancement of Christianity. It is an economic, cultural, it is the economic and cultural heart of the country, filled with some beautiful homes, with shops, with embassies, and a very deep connection to history. It is also the sea city, which means the place where the head of the Orthodox, of 300 million Orthodox Christians is located. Bartholomew I, who is the ecumenical patriarchate of 300 million Orthodox throughout the world. So even in a country that is now very Muslim, and is in the same way that that in the church in the country of England, the Church of England is the state church. Islam is the state religion in Turkey. As somebody who grew up in the deep south, you go out in the country, at every corner there's a Methodist and Baptist church. In Istanbul and throughout most of Turkey, there's a mosque on every corner. Many of them have been constructed by the government now. And what we learned is that even though Islam is the national religion, only about 30% of the people are faithful. And so when the call to prayer goes out throughout the day, people just kind of keep doing their thing. We didn't see any mad dashes to a mosque, nobody putting down a prayer mat to pray. Life just goes on in this incredibly vibrant and bustling city. This is one of the mosques in a large square that's located in the middle of Istanbul, and this is very similar to many of the mosques that you see throughout Istanbul and throughout the country. This is just one of the streets in the heart of Istanbul, and actually this was kind of a slow moment. There are literally thousands and thousands of people that walk through this area on a daily and regular basis. And then, if you may have heard of Turkish delight, there is plenty of it. And this was one of the shops that it was recommended that we go to, and again, there was plenty of it, and it was absolutely delicious. While in Istanbul, we had the opportunity to worship at an Anglican church, and when I refer to the Anglican church again, which I will in a few minutes, I'm referring to churches that are part of the Church of England. And we had an opportunity to worship. Our group had an opportunity to worship on a Sunday morning at the Crimean Memorial Church. This is the priest who's had the walker. He had just had surgery. It was a very interesting experience and a wonderful experience. I think he'd been like 10 days from some sort of replacement, but he comes in not only could he come in on a walker and was a celebrant throughout the service, but he also baptized 3 adults in a large baptismal font. And so I went away with this guy being my hero. He did monumental work on this Sunday, was very gracious, and followed up with me later to let me know how much he appreciated our group being there. From Istanbul, we left and went on to Nicaea. And I'm just going to flip through some of these pictures because not all of them are things you may want to look at, and I think we've got a little bit out of order here, so we may not look at many of them. We went to Nicaea, which is, you may recognize as being a part of what we stand up and discuss and talk about every Sunday when we proclaim what we believe in the words of the Nicene Creed. So we had an opportunity to visit the church where the ecumenical council met that resulted in the formation of the Nicene Creed, and it is now a mosque. And that's not uncommon. Many of the holy Christian sites that were churches at one point have now been converted to mosques. This particular year is the 1700th anniversary of the Nicene Creed. And so some of the other pilgrimages and trips that we found out about while we were there have revolved around that. We also then visited Smyrna, which was Smyrna, but now known as Izmir. We also had an opportunity while in Smyrna to visit this church, which is another Anglican church, the Church of St. John the Evangelist. This is the priest of that parish standing with us, holding a cat, and you're going to hear more about cats in a few minutes. This is the only Anglican church and one of the few Christian churches in that particular area. You'll notice that Father Nathan and I happened to be wearing our clerical collars that day, which we did not do a whole lot. And the priest, James, was telling me that he's not allowed by law to go outside of his parish wearing a clerical collar. Because of the fact that it's an Islamic country. He said we were fine because we were guests. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of some of the flavor of religious identity there. Actually, this is the church the former church that is now a mosque, which is where the First Ecumenical Council met that formulated the Nicene Creed. From Smyrna, we went on to Miletus, where Paul founded a church, and then on to the city of Didyma, where we visited this massive temple of Apollo. The whole country is filled with an interesting connections between the various empires, various religious traditions, various temples that were built, many of which have been preserved in some very significant ways, and others, quite frankly, that are still being uncovered today. From there, we went to Ephesus, which is one of the places that has some of the most well-preserved ruins. This was the crowd on the day that we were there, and we had been told that the day before it was worse. There were more people than this. This is our group standing in front of the library in Ephesus, which was a phenomenal structure, and I think for many of us, this was a very significant place to be. We also had an opportunity to visit the tomb of St. John, which you see pictured here. And then this is Philadelphia. This is the remains of the church in Philadelphia, another one of the places mentioned by Paul. And then the latter part of the trip, we went to a place called Cappadocia. And this is a huge rock formation of which there are many in this very unique part of Turkey, and places where monks went and carved chapels into the rock, along with some magnificent frescoes. So you can see that this is one of the chapels with a cross up above it. And then this would be an example of places that where people had lived at one point because they were fleeing from persecution. And so they went into this place where, again, all these very unique rock formations are and built homes. One of the most significant experiences for me personally was being able to celebrate a Eucharist inside of one of the chapels that had been carved into this rock. And it had been in use since the 2nd century, I believe. And I think all of us were just kind of in awe of that experience. As I said, we had fun. Jacqueline Van Wilden, who's on our staff here, and I were asked to point to one of the unusual rock formations that's in the shape of a camel up at the top of this mountain outside of Cappadocia. And then one of the things that we try to do at the end of every day is to just spend some time talking about what we've seen and experienced in that place. And so this is a few of us who had gathered at the end of the day. Turkey is a very nationalistic place. There are huge flags flying everywhere, especially in Istanbul. So you're constantly reminded of where you are, and that includes also banners and pictures of the president and also of the founder of the country of Turkey. All right, Nathan Hayden.
Okay, David did cover some things that I could talk about too. So I'm going to try to, go through my part of this portion of the presentation a little quickly. I did just kind of want to give a little rundown, a list of all the places that we did go to. Istanbul, Chalcedon, Nicaea, Pergamum, Smyrna, Miletus, Didyma, Ephesus, Sardis, Philadelphia, Pamukkale, Hierapolis, Laodicea, Antioch of Pisidia, Iconium, Cappadocia. We did all of that in the space of 2 weeks. That is just a remarkable amount of travel and the sites that we were able to see. Overwhelming. It was difficult to process everything that we were able to see. A lot of the places that we went to, also, we have like the biblical name or other historical name for them, but they might be known by more Turkish names now, like Chalcedon, is known as Kadikoy now, or, Istanbul, was Constantinople. You have Iconium, where Paul went, is now known as Konya. So, various little switches and changes like that have happened over time. But the interesting thing is that the foundations, are still evident of the past there. So what I want to talk about is briefly is really just some of the historical and theological significance of the place that we did go to. This area of Asia Minor, Turkey, it's also known as, its original Greek name was Anatolia, which is simply a Greek term that means the East. Asia Minor comprises a lot of this until you get to, formal, continent Asia. But this area has, over time, has had a lot of things that have covered. So there's this term in manuscript studies that's called a palimpsest. And that may be a term that you've heard before. A palimpsest is where you have written something on a manuscript and then someone later comes in and says, you know what, I kind of need this parchment for something else, so I'm going to scrape off what was here and write over it instead. And we know that happens because particularly now, there are studies when you do manuscript research that show through like X-ray multispectral imaging what was written on before, the evidence of it is still there. And so you can see what was there originally and what had been written over it over time. And that's really what we were experiencing in a place like this, because you had, as I said earlier, you had Romans, you had Greeks, eventually you have the Ottomans, you have all of this swirling about. And this was also happening not just now, but also throughout ancient history. And so you have basically the Romans, come in and they create an infrastructure of roads and aqueducts. You have, Greek culture that then comes in, the process of a Hellenization. You have all of these things that are connected together. And so this is happening prior to the spread of Christianity, as we see in the book of Acts. So basically what we have here is, here's Jerusalem down here. You have Pentecost, and then you have people at that point going out and taking the message of the gospel to all sorts of places. And so it starts from here and spreads throughout all this way, and making its way, further there, but also moving towards there. And so this is a map that shows basically that spread of Christianity that then gets, placed onto the earlier foundations of what existed there throughout this portion of the world. And so this map that looks like just a bunch of colorful spaghetti is really a showing the missionary journeys that Paul did. And so we can see the places that he went to, and we were able to see churches that not only that he may have gone to, but some areas that he would have founded churches for Christian worship. And so from there, we have the development of the Byzantine Empire. When Constantine becomes sole emperor of the Roman Empire, he moves the capital of the Roman Empire from Rome to what is now Istanbul, but he moves it to this area and renames it Constantinople, the city of Constantine, and then that becomes the epicenter for early Christianity around in early 4th century. So a lot of these things are already mentioned. I just have kind of a quick rundown of some of the places that we went to. So again, Istanbul was originally Constantinople. It is this significant spiritual center, particularly for Orthodox Christianity. That is where we went to go visit the ecumenical patriarchate, who is the spiritual leader for Orthodox Christians. The prayer rope that I'm wearing now, I got from their shop, so that was a nice souvenir to bring back. We went to Chalcedon, the site of the Fourth Ecumenical Council, which was held in the early mid-ish 5th century, with some significant theological implications for that. We went to Nicaea, the site of the First Ecumenical Council. This picture right here is doesn't look like a lot, but these are the ruins of the emperor's palace where bishops gathered for the first council. So it's amazing to be able to see that. This is the church in Istanbul that we visited up here. This is the baptistry that David was talking about, where there were three people being baptized there. This is an image from Cora Church. Again, interestingly, what we have here is, again, this idea of what I was talking about before, this concept of palimpsest, this like overriding of something, because what we have is the evidence of these, of early Christianity here, but then we also see the spread of Islam and the Ottoman Empire coming in. And then what happens is that the structures are retained, but then they're converted to mosques. And so changes are made, because you can't have images of people theologically in the Islamic religion. A lot of images like frescoes and icons of saints or of Jesus, things like that, would be covered up. And so this is the inside of the church Hagia Sophia, where originally the Patriarch of Constantinople would have led worship. But as you can see here, there are still some images that exist. It's hard to see it. This is an image of an angel, and like near the top of the dome here. But there's also these medallions with this Arabic writing on it, and so like the images are still there behind them, but they're covered up, they're obscured, so that they can have something that's emblematic of their worship. But also, there's a sense of respect there of what was there before. So again, Smyrna, Miletus, Didyma, Ephesus, visited by Paul twice. Ephesus is again where the tomb of John the Apostle was. It is also where we were able to visit according to tradition, the home of where Mary, the mother of Jesus, lived after all of the events that we find in Scripture. The tradition is that John did take care of Mary after the crucifixion of Christ and the resurrection. He took care of her, and they went to Ephesus, and that is where they lived, where he cared for her after that point. Here is my picture of the entrance to Ephesus. So I was able to very happily not get a whole lot of people in that one. But again, really important places. I wanted to make sure that I included an image of a synagogue, and that's what this is. Let's see, I'm blanking on where that is. That was Sardis? Okay, okay. So Sardis is where we visited that synagogue, where some of the tile work that's there is being worked on, like being restored, but also being, uncovered as well. You can kind of, the site Pamukkale, that was really just like a more touristy place, and I didn't go to that one, so I will avoid talking about that. And then here, this is, again, you can kind of read through some of what was mentioned here. Laodicea is mentioned in Revelation. Antioch is, Paul clearly visited there. Konya was very interesting because that is where a significant percentage of much more conservative adherents of Islam live, and that is also where we went to go see the tomb of one of the most famous figures of mystical Islam, Rumi, of the whirling dervishes, and these are pictures of the museum and the tomb of some of these people. This is a picture of the church that we did celebrate Eucharist in Cappadocia, which again, carved out of, the stone of the cave, but very interesting in that it had elements of, Byzantine architecture within it. Just a really amazing experience. And then last, this is me enjoying some Turkish coffee that David did not like, but Jacqueline and I did. So thank you very much.
So what you're going to hear next are some presentations from several of the people who are part of the pilgrimage. And what I asked them to do was just to talk, they're going to just share with you what some things that were significant to them. Jane Ann?
Are you going to make me flip slides?
I can flip them for you.
Okay, all right.
You just tell me when.
Okay, now it's good. Yeah. Okay, so I chose to talk about Nicaea because of the historical significance to us with respect to the Nicene Creed. So I didn't make that slide, and I'm okay. Yeah. Okay. So this is where this is another picture of what Nathan was talking about earlier, of where the First Council of Nicaea was held at the Palace of Constantine, which is under that lake that you saw the picture of. And that's a picture of the wall that some of the ruins that were there on the shore of the lake, so that we couldn't see this. This was a picture that I took of the signage that was around the historical site. But that underneath the lake, if you get up above it, that's what you could see, and they're uncovering that now and looking at it. But that's where the First Council of Nicaea was held, and then if you want to go ahead and go to the next slide, then about, 4 centuries later, something like that, they had the Second Council of Nicaea, and that was actually held at this church that was up in the city of Iznik, is where the ancient city of Nicaea is. And this is the exterior, and the next slide is the interior of the church. So you can see this church was actually, it didn't exist. I think they started building it at the time of the First Council of Nicaea, and then it was built over the centuries, and then I think it was destroyed by an earthquake, and then in about 1065, this structure was built up on top of the ruins, and so it's become the main structure. But they've tried to preserve, as Nathan noted, some of the Christian aspects of it, because after the Ottoman conquest, it went into service as a mosque, which is why it's called the Hagia Sophia of Iznik, and it remained in service, I think, until 1935, and then it became a museum, and then in 2011, they put it back into service as a mosque, so now it serves as a museum and a mosque. So it was interesting to see all of that evolution as we were in the walking through the historical site. But what I found most meaningful about it was that this was a place where the early Christians were trying to find common ground, because there were a lot of different views about Christianity, not unlike we live in today. And so they were able to reach common ground on sort of a summary of the tenets of what binds us together as Christians, which we've had many sermons on. What does that mean for us now? And it's meaningful to me that they were able, with all those diverse views, come to consensus about some common ground that binds us all as a community, and it has stood the test of time. Now, there's still some things I think people talk about, different controversies about, different things about the Nicene Creed and other things that they covered in the councils, but it has stood, particularly for us in the Episcopal Church, it has stood the test of time. This is what we agreed on. This is how we live in community. This is what we're going to go forward on and how we're going to be in community together. And I thought that was really one of the most meaningful moments for me on the trip. So.
Thank you, Jan. Jacqueline.
Thank you. Okay, I don't like that he said the most meaningful thing first, so let's say that that doesn't apply to mine, and that mine's more of a quick intermission. Cats of Turkey. So we're gonna rapid fire this because I see what time it is. There are cats everywhere in Turkey. They're not just in Istanbul, as you may be told. Street cats. You think of street cats, you think maybe they're dirty, maybe they're sad. No. These cats are well taken care of. People put food and water out for them. There's all this beautiful graffiti and then these beautiful cats. And they are fearless. For the most part, they just walk right, they own Turkey. You are just there. At a young age, they learn to be fearless and they just kind of roam around. They come right up to you for the most part. And everything is theirs. These might look like the Nolker's bags, but no, those are those cats' bags. And so that cat on the left is showing Dee Dee some nice textiles. The cat in the middle is ordering an ice cream. The cat up here is taking us on a tour. And some try to hide. They don't do very well. But mostly they just want to sleep. As cats do, they just want to sleep. Wherever. They find cute little spaces. They find really anywhere. People don't bother them. They find telephone booths, random poles, your lunch seat, and even this little kitty right here in the little pot. Yeah, as I said, it's all their area. There are museum cats. There are boat cats. Boat cats are fluffy. It was a very fluffy, beautiful cat. These are church cats, as mentioned. The one on the right, white cat on the right, Cleopatra. She's been there for about 8 years. Mandalina on the left arrived about 1.5, 2 years ago and demanded to be part of the church, we were told. There are hotel cats, and there are pottery cats. And there are ancient ruin cats. Just hanging out with 1,000-year-old, that's my favorite picture on the left. If you can't see, there's a little kitty just hanging out at the feet. Hanging out with ancient ruins, not caring at all, just wanting to lay and be comfy, even on ancient toilets. So this is Toilet Cat. I was told by a guide that this is her domain. You do not move her. She's very happy. And they don't mind the tourists either. They just sleep. They look all different kinds. There's not like you see every time kind of cat anywhere. And if anyone here tells you that they weren't happy about the cats, they're lying to you because they all enjoyed the cats very much. Even David, hanging out with the cat. If you're not a cat person, there were a couple puppies. But mostly it was cats.
I told you we had fun also, right? All right, the Knights.
Okay.
You got it?
Well, I don't know if I've got it. Let's see. Yeah. Okay. So I chose 2 places, Sardis and Hierapolis, and both of those places were of particular interest to me. But when I visit all of these places, I'm always trying to figure out why they exist. Why they exist. I mean, why were they there? This is 10th, 12th century BCE. People have been living here forever, it seems. Why are they there? So Sardis, one of the things is geography. Sardis is here. The Aegean is here. It sits on 2 rivers, so they have trade that comes through there. Trade up north, trade to the Silk Road out east, and south down here. So it was a big trading area. Hierapolis, what you'll see here is this is a place of healing. Incredible hot springs there. So this gives you a quick overview. I just wanted to show you some of the places where we visited. This along here doesn't look quite like it, but this is all coming from the hot springs here. This is all travertine limestone that has come up out of the mountains through the hot springs and precipitated itself out onto the side of the mountain. This area, the town that we stayed in, Nathan mentioned it as Pamukkale, which translates to Cotton Castle. You can see these travertine limestone from 50, 60 miles away. They're huge. So that's that. This is also, we walked through about a little over a mile long, 10 centuries worth of cemeteries, which gives you a really amazing look at all of the different ways that people experience death and resurrection, if they're into that. The main thing for me was all the way up there, 16. That is the memorial of St. Philip, which St. Philip is listed in the canonical Gospels as one of the first 12. We don't know anything about St. Philip. So that was one of the reasons I wanted to take a look at that. I'll go quickly here, but this gives you some sense of this jumbled cemetery. And everything through this area, when we're seeing ruins, typically the ruins were a result of huge earthquakes. There's a big earthquake in 17 AD, which most of the places, the Romans were still collecting taxes so they could rebuild. 4th or 5th and 6th century basically wiped out most of these temples. And you can see here a mile-long cemetery that is all really in jumbles. Let's see here. So this drops us off at the big marketplace there. This was quite a walk. This was a walk up to St. Philip's Memorial. And what you can see down here at the base, this is just the top of that travertine limestone down at the bottom. So what about St. Philip? This whole story was kind of interesting because this was all buried by earthquakes. This all started, was found in the early 70s by some Italian archaeologists, and they've been rebuilding it ever since. This was a huge place. It had 40 to 50 rooms for pilgrims, a variety of different places of worship, but the primary place was a basilica. You can see some of it here. There were about 6 of these big archways that circle St. Philip's tomb with an altar over it, and the basilica would sit on top of that. So this is all rebuilt. Within each of these arches, the keystone had some sort of a decoration. This was the decoration in the one closest to the altar. Typical decorations were a circle with a cross, which is the eternal word in a finite creation. This looks like a Star of David. It's 2 superimposed or crossing squares, and you'll find different meanings for this, but the one that seemed to make sense to me was the reconciliation of opposites: heaven, earth, divine, human, life, death. So one of the things I wanted to mention is I did find some translations of some of the apocryphal manuscripts of St. Philip. So St. Philip was preaching against a pagan cult. It was all vipers and serpents. Crazy. He was being very successful, and one of the successes was converting the wife of the proconsul, who didn't like that, and that caused him to be arrested, flogged, and crucified upside down like St. Peter. That's a brief sketch of St. Philip, but obviously had a huge impact on the place. This is a look at what some of that limestone looks like. It is incredible. It's huge. It's very tough to get a picture without people bathing. There are lots of folks in there. Let's see, and that gives you a look of it over the edge of the mountain. Just an incredible sight. Sardis, we talked a little bit about Sardis. This is from Revelations. The thing about Sardis, in addition to being on rivers, was it was on a high plateau, and it was protected by this tumulus mountain range on both sides. So it was very well protected as long as the guards stayed awake. They were taken over by King Cyrus because they were sleeping, and that's a reference to the wake up of Revelation. I'm not going to go through all of this, but again, this is an incredible place. It started in early 1200 BCE. It sits on these two rivers that were full of gold and silver. It had this material that was 55% gold, 44% silver, and they figured out a way to separate that, and they were rolling in the dough. They had tons of money, and in fact, they invented the concept of money, the mercantile system of they minted the first coins, gold coins, as you see, and started the whole idea of paying for services as opposed to bartering. They worshipped Cybele, a mother god. King Cyrus takes over the place. That's important in 547. That's important because the Babylonian exile had all of the Jews in this area. He basically ended the Babylonian exile and expressed tolerance to Jews. So that was the beginning of Jewish success in this area. I can't go through all of these things. We've talked a lot about temples. This is an Artemis temple. There's a huge one also in Ephesus. Artemis is sort of the blend of Cybele here into another goddess of nature, healing, childbirth, and so forth. When we get to this gymnasium, this is a Roman gymnasium with baths. Right adjacent to this is that big Sardis synagogue. This is the largest ancient synagogue that they've found, large enough to hold 1,000 people at a time. Right adjacent to this gymnasium, this Roman gymnasium. They believe this was a gift to the Jews, the Jewish population. They were very well accepted and a major part of what was going on in Sardis. Lisa was inspired to write a poem about Sardis that she shared with us like immediately after she wrote it, as we were getting on the bus. And the interesting thing about this whole thing with Sardis is that we were the only people there. It was really, really quiet. And we were kind of going through the whole place. It was a beautiful day, hardly any wind, and we're just walking through this place. Let me key it up for her. I want her to read this poem. I didn't realize it at the time, but this is Lisa. This is Lisa being inspired by the Artemis Temple. And Lisa, to my way of thinking, this represents really the vibe or the spiritual aspect of the entire trip for me.
I can't see it. I got my comment.
I walk among the shattered stones, columns that once bore the weight of Artemis's glory. Their carvings still whisper of power of a people reaching upward with marble and myth. Yet between cracks, I see other stories, crosses faintly etched where once the goddess reigned, the quiet persistence of a faith that outlived the empire, a reminder that even the strongest walls cannot hold back the tide of the spirit. Nearby, the Grand Synagogue rises in memory, its mosaics still bright with the prayers of a community who sang the Shema in the heart of a pagan city. Strength and survival are etched into every stone, a testament of covenant and exile. And then from across the valley, the call to prayer echoes, the voice of yet another faith woven into the fabric of this land. Its chant meets the silence of ruins, layer upon layer, each voice carried by the same wind, each seeking the one who is beyond all the names. I stand in awe of this chorus of centuries, pagan, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, stones and prayers intertwined. Sardis is not silent. It sings of longing, of failure, of hope, and of the God who remains when temples fall. The thing. Okay. I feel like this pilgrimage, like the last one, I come up here and make my confession. I had no expectations going into Turkey, no idea what the cradle of Christianity might feel like beneath my feet. I hadn't read about the 7 churches of Revelation or imagined that the ruins still whispered or to me screamed loudly of generations of people seeking their God. For a Greek mythology junkie like me, Pergamum was a revelation of another kind where Zeus and Athena once ruled the high places, and our faith somehow began to rise among the stones they left behind. This is from the book of Revelation. To the angel of the church in Pergamum write, these are the words of him who has the sharp double-edged sword. I know where you live, where Satan has his throne. Yet you remain true to my name and did not deny your faith in me, even in the days of Antipas, my witness, my faithful one, who was killed among you, where Satan lives. 2,000 years ago, Pergamum rose like a crown above the Caicus River Valley, a city of marble and ambition, gleaming in the sun, ruling both land and spirit. Its Acropolis held temples to Zeus, Athena, and the Roman Empire, an emperor side by side. To the Romans, this was the perfect arrangement, the gods of Greece and the divine emperors of Rome, sharing one sacred space, one hierarchy of honor. Devotion to the Roman Empire became a religion of its own. That's why John called it where Satan has his throne. It wasn't that paganism and emperor worship clashed. It was that they had merged into one glittering system that left no room for the God of Christ. To reach Pergamum, we left the highway behind us and wound through a small Turkish village up cobblestone streets that smelled of bread and dust and fumes. The air thinned, the wind grew wild, pressing against us, playful, insistent, as if the mountain itself were breathing. Above, the sky was a perfect, defiant blue. From somewhere below, the call to prayer drifted across the valley, ancient, haunting, deeply human. The sound moved through the air like smoke, and for a moment it felt as though the whole valley was reaching for the same unseen presence. By the time we reached the top, the ruins stretched before us in silence. Marble gleamed in the sunlight, fragments of temple lay scattered like fallen stars. It was as if the whole city had exhaled and all that remained was beauty and the sound of the wind. And then there it was, the temple of Trajan, the Roman emperor, gleaming white against the sky, columns tall and slender, marble cut so precisely you could slip a breath through the seams. 2,000 years later, the edges are still sharp, the carvings still sure of themselves, as if the hands that shaped them knew they were building forever. It stopped me cold to realize this temple was raised within a century of Jesus' death. While the early church still hid in the shadows, disciples quietly carving symbols into stone indicating safe places, this empire built its glory on the hill. A monument to loyalty, to fear. It says something about the human heart, our desire to worship power when it looks beautiful. Above the altar, Medusa's knowing smile and snaky hair, beauty and brutality, mercy and menace entwined, the still grace of power posing as divine. Here the gods of Greece and the lords of Rome shared the same steep hill, their stories sculpted and set into one another, Zeus above, Caesar beside, each vying for veneration. And in that silence of stone and sun, John's words still echo where Satan has his throne. Beneath the temple, the air cools and stills, arched halls perfect and hushed, built for the silence beneath the noise of gods. Just below the temple of Trajan, the mountain drops away into the great theater, a half moon carved from stone and sky. It could hold 10,000 souls stacked steep as a breaking wave. Even now, standing at the rim, your knees signal danger. The slope pulls at you, the steps tilt narrow, the wind presses at your back, whispering warning and daring. We edge downward slowly, one careful step at a time. Beneath us, tunnels carved through rock, opened in a sudden brilliance, dark to light, shadow to sun, a drop so sheer it stole your breath. The valley unfurled below, the river threading silver through the fields, still carrying the same water that once nourished the city of gods. Standing there surrounded by marble and myth, I kept asking myself, how did our faith survive here? Every stone whispered of power, every altar promised safety to those who bowed. In a city seduced by myth, where emperors were gods and gods were many, what chance did a crucified carpenter's followers have? And yet somehow they endured. They were young believers from Ephesus, fresh in their hope, still learning their courage, happy, frightened, unsteady, but believing Jesus was bigger than all of this. Hidden in the noise and the wind, they prayed. Their faith was not loud, only steady, not a torch to outshine the empire, but a candle that refused to go out. The empire built its throne here, but faith outlasted marble and might. Power bowed its proud head. Prayer rose stronger than the sword. Here politics posed as piety, and incense carried the scent of obedience. Yet even in that perfumed air, truth learned to begin again, to breathe again. Faith does not thrive because it's welcomed. Neither were the early Christians. It survives because someone, somewhere refused to let it go. The lesson of Pergamum, we all have hills to climb and empires to face, and we each must decide which gods we will worship. The remnants still glitter where they fell, but faith was never one of them. It isn't what lies broken on the ground. It's what still stands when everything else has fallen. And I wrote a poem. Pergamum, you bad boy. Columns strike a pose against the sun. Shadows long as runway legs. Faces carved in stone still smirk, gossiping through the centuries. Through a jagged theater window, you wink at the valley, teasing with ruins, half broken, wholly gorgeous. Pergamum, still making mortals blush.
All right. So hopefully that gives you an overview of our pilgrimage to Turkey, and might have time for a question or two if there are any. There will be other pilgrimages, and I hope that some of you may be willing to participate in those. So more to come. Good to be with you all. God bless you.